This is an R Media podcast.
Like a mantra for me as I went through my grief was, it hurts exactly as much as it was worth. So when it feels really heavy and really painful, and it still can do some days, I just remember that I'm honouring that, it's the love, and that's why it hurts. The love is still there.
Marie Claire presents You're Gonna Want to Hear This.
Welcome back to You're Gonna Want to Hear This, a Marie Claire podcast. I'm your host, Georgie McCourt. Now, back in 2014, Hannah Richell's life changed forever. The bestselling author and mother of two lost her husband Matt very suddenly when he drowned in Tamarama Beach, leaving her to navigate overwhelming grief while raising two young children and trying to make sense of a future that she never pictured. For years, Hannah did what so many people do after unimaginable loss, and that is she kept going. She raised her children, she continued writing fiction novels, and slowly rebuilt a life. But privately, she was also going through something else, and that is the story of grief as she lived it. 12 years later, those pages have become her first memoir, An Ocean and a Day. It's an intimate, honest reflection on love and loss, motherhood, and what it really means to move forward. Not by just leaving grief behind, but by learning to carry it, because you do carry grief throughout your entire life. In this conversation, Hannah shares what it's like to revisit the darkest chapter of her life and why she waited a decade to tell this story, but also the unexpected hope that she has found along the way. This is Hannah Richell, and you're going to want to hear this. Hannah, I want to go back to 2014, which was 12 years ago now. Your life changed forever. You were 39 years old. Your children were 3 and 6, and I have two children who are 12 and 13, so I know how full on those days are. Now, two police officers arrived at your door.
Yeah.
Some people listening will know your story, but for those who don't, tell me what unfolded that day.
Sure. So that day, it was a very ordinary Wednesday in July. It was the school holidays. It was a beautifully sunny day, one of those sort of crisp Sydney winter days. And my husband Matt and I had a coffee that morning. He had decided that he was going to work out of the office. He'd been away on a business trip and recently come back. And he just sort of said, I'm going to do things a bit different today. So he had decided to work in a cafe on a business strategy, and then he was going to meet a work contact down at a beach in Sydney, and they were going to have what they were calling a board meeting on their surfboards and talk shop.
I've never heard that. I'm sure that's quite surfers use that term, but I love it.
Yeah, it's a good one, right?
Yeah.
So that was sort of his plan for the day. My day was getting the kids to their various spots, and then I was going to go and work on my third novel because I was working as a novelist and was under contract to produce 2 novels for my publisher. So we had a really sort of brief but lovely morning together, went our separate ways, and then around lunchtime my phone started ringing, and I was wrestling with my novel, not having a particularly good time with it, and looked down and didn't recognise the phone number, so I ignored it to begin with, but it kept ringing, and I thought, that mother guilt kicks in, and you think, it could be the kids, I need to get that. So I answered it, and it was my husband's PA, who I'd never actually spoken to before. She was relatively new to the company. And she said that a Bondi detective had called the office trying to get hold of Matt's home address. And she couldn't get hold of Matt, so she was calling me because she didn't want to give out the information without Matt's consent. And so we had this sort of slightly baffled conversation where we were saying, well, what could this be about? This is really odd. And I put down the phone and I just had this feeling of, I need to go home. I don't know what's happening right now, but I need to get home. So I packed everything up and I walked up the hill back to our little inner west cottage. And as I was going, I phoned our childminder who had the kids at the house, and I said, strange question, but has anyone come to the house? And she said, yes, there are 2 police detectives here. Wow. So I knew something had happened, but I didn't know what. And I kind of ran the rest of the way home. I pulled out my keys, and as I put my key to the door, I kind of knew that as I was going to step through the threshold of that space, something bad was waiting for me. But I had to go in because my kids were inside. And so I opened the door and there were 2 police detectives in plain clothes. One of them looked like she'd been crying. And they said, "Are you Hannah Richell?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And they said, "I'm really sorry to tell you that your husband's been in a surfing accident down at Tamarama Beach." And so I said, "Is Matt okay?" Thinking I would jump in a taxi and go to the hospital wherever he was. And they said, "No, I'm sorry to say he died." And that was the moment really that life changed forever for us.
Oh my, I just can't. Because did your mind go to that place when you were running home and when you were putting the keys through the door?
No. I mean, honestly, I can say it didn't. I had this feeling welling up of me of something really bad. But I don't think you ever expect that very worst thing. I truly did not believe, even when they said Matt has died, I didn't believe it. I couldn't take it in. It was just a rupture of what felt real. I couldn't digest it.
Which I think is completely normal. How can you digest news like that? Do you remember what you did next?
It's a bit blurry, but I do remember the police telling me that because the accident had happened in a very public space, media crews had arrived at the beach very quickly, and so it was going to be on the news. So they were urging me to contact people to tell them before they saw it on the news. So I was in this really precarious position of having to think, who do I need to tell? And what am I going to tell them? Because, as I just explained, my brain was not catching up with reality. And so I think I made 5 phone calls with the help of the police. And I had to say the words out loud, "Matt's dead." And it was just horrific because it felt like everything was suddenly, going into fast forward. But I was still, wanting to be on the other side of where that, it's like the knife falls and your life separates. And I didn't want to be on that side of it. I wanted to be back where everything was normal and safe.
Had you thought about, because there's also the children to tell, and they're 3 and 6, they're young. It's very hard to get them to understand. I don't know, delivering that news to your children, I can't even imagine how horrible it feels knowing you've got to tell them that, because we spend, mothers and dads, all we want to do is wrap them up in cotton wool and protect them and not traumatise them. And
I think it's the hardest thing I've ever done is being their mother and knowing that I had to tell them something that would break their hearts and then hold them through that experience. It was probably the worst day of my life telling them that, but I decided not to tell them that evening, and I needed the evening to process it myself, to try and find the words, to try and work out how on earth to tell them. And I wanted them to have one night where they could go to bed feeling that the family was still intact and everything was okay. And they must have been aware of the police in the house. And I remember my son going up to bed that night saying, "Mummy, why are you crying?" And so they must have, kids, even so really young kids, they understand, but they didn't ask me. And so we had that one night, and then I woke up in the morning. My sister had flown that evening to be with me from Melbourne, and miraculously, I seem to remember we did fall asleep at some point that night, and then I woke up really early, and I went into their bedrooms and told them the worst thing I would ever have to tell them.
Oh, wow. I can't. That would have to be the worst day.
I think so.
Of your life.
Yeah.
I can't imagine how, children are so hard to predict. Sometimes they'll just sort of not say anything. Sometimes they'll start crying.
I actually don't remember that moment with them in my son's bedroom. I remember holding them, but that's all I can really remember. I think either shock or self-preservation, something is muffling that memory in my brain. And so I struggle to sort of take myself back there now.
Do they ever speak about that day? Because obviously they're teenagers now.
Yeah, they don't. we talk about their dad all the time, but we don't talk about that specific day. I mean, I would feel uncomfortable raising it
Definitely.
for them. If they wanted to raise it with me, I would absolutely talk to them about it. I mean, I might struggle to tell them exactly how it unfolded and what happened because, as I've said, a lot of it's a bit blurry. But I'm really conscious that it's important that we have those conversations and that we process the trauma as much as possible. And I was told by a really brilliant child psychologist early on that they will continue to carry and process their grief in different ways as they age and hit different milestones. They will miss their father in so many different ways as they grow up. So it's always, to me, felt like we need to have an open door to the conversation if they want to have it. But at the same time, I don't want to force it on them.
No, exactly. And I think grief, as you very well know, it is a lifelong journey. And I think with children, and even if you haven't experienced grief in your childhood, if you experience trauma, it can come up. Like I know when I became a mother, things came up because it takes you back to your childhood. So I imagine they'll be processing parts of losing their dad forever.
I think so, yeah.
You began writing just 7 days after Matt's death, and as a writer myself, I know that it's sort of, you just need to get to write things down, and it's a sort of form of therapy and can be quite cathartic and just a way of processing. And I can't even, 7 days after, you must have still just, it must have been incredibly surreal. Do you remember what writing those first pages felt like, and also who were you writing for? Because it was never intended at this stage to be a memoir.
You're right. I wasn't thinking, I'm going to turn this tragedy into a book. That was the furthest thing from my mind. I felt utterly shattered in my body, my heart, my mind, and the thought of trying to write anything that made any sense whatsoever was well beyond me. But as a writer and as someone who had always journaled and found great comfort throughout my childhood and my sort of teenage years when you're full of angst, it had always been something I'd turned to, picking up a pen and opening up my journal. So it felt quite instinctive, really, after those 7 days when the house went quiet and the kids were in bed and I felt so desperately sad and alone, to just pick up my pen and start just letting my feelings out onto the page. And so it felt like release, really. It was just an act of survival to get some of the overwhelming emotion that was kind of ripping through my body out. And it was just sort of, it came out in great sort of swarm of words on the page.
What emotions were coming out? I mean, obviously sadness, but talk me through what were the emotions, but also was there any unexpected emotions coming out?
Yeah, so I think grief in those early days is just like a storm that's kind of passing through you, and it's so many different emotions. It's obviously sadness, desolation, agony, it's rage, it's a constant sort of questioning of like, where are you and how did this happen and why us in the very, very early days, although that did quite quickly turn into a sort of, well, why not us? I started to see that these things are happening to people every day, I think one of the emotions that rose up in me that I was really surprised by was shame. I felt this horrible sense of wrongness to our life suddenly, that, I felt like we've been doing everything right, trying to live really good lives, working hard, trying to be good parents, loving each other, and suddenly we're on this new trajectory that we hadn't asked for. And so I felt a strange shame to suddenly have the label of widow. I was 39 and I felt so different from everyone around me, from my friends and, all of our social group. And I was a single parent suddenly. And I think there's a horrendous social stigma that we attach to the idea of single parenting. And I think, single parents are heroes doing really hard work. But I was suddenly ticking those boxes on forms saying, yes, I'm a single parent. Yes, I'm a widow. Who's our emergency contact? I don't know anymore.
And you're also in Australia, so you're not in the UK
where
you were from. So you are far away from home as well. So when you're talking about an emergency contact who's on the other side of the world.
It was really tricky. So my family was split across the UK, and I had my dad and my sister in Melbourne. But Matt and I had set up our home in Sydney, and it had been home for quite a few years when this happened. Fortunately, we had a really great group of friends around us. I made great friends through my mother's group when I had my son.
That's really nice, because that can be rare.
Yeah, I know. I was very lucky, actually. The women that I met were a wonderful bunch, like really supportive. And so, they kind of swept in and really did help us. But you just feel so alone. You're on a different plane, and I think I describe it in the memoir as feeling a bit like you've fallen into a sinkhole, and you can kind of look up and you see the world moving on, and there's light up there somewhere, but you are down deep in the darkness, and you can't get out.
Have a completely new identity overnight. You everything that you knew shifted, and you were like, labels are horrible, but by definition, you were a widow. And I think society makes us move in. It's very coupled.
Yes.
You've got the two parents and then the children, and suddenly you don't fit into that. Tell me about you and Matt as a couple and your love, because that's such an important part of the book as well. And I think obviously you talk about grief, but what kind of couple were you?
Yeah.
What kind of guy was Matt?
So I always felt it was important to share just sort of some fragments of Matt in this book, because although it's my journey through losing him and sort of working through 10 years of grief, really, I felt it was important to say a little bit about who he was as a man and as a husband and as a father. And he was great, we were just a kind of everyday normal couple, really, but we met at work in London. He came in and stole a job that I had been hoping to get, a promotion. So it wasn't a great start. Yeah. I was pretty pissed off with him, to be honest.
But he must have charmed you if you then went on to date him and marry him.
Well, I was determined not to like him. And then it was 2001 when he joined the company. And a few weeks later, the Twin Towers fell. There was that horrendous terrorist attack in New York. And it was the day after. We went and got a coffee together. I think sitting in the office together just felt really claustrophobic, and everything felt wrong the day after that. And we just sat by a canal and we had a coffee together and we started talking, and that was when I suddenly saw that the man I thought was really...
The man who stole your job
stole my job.
Quite lovely.
And he was he was handsome and charming, but I kind of was very mistrustful of that. And so I wasn't prepared to give him the time of day, but then as we talked, I kind of understood that he was, as he presented, he was incredibly well-read, passionate about books, a real sort of kind heart. And I saw that he was carrying his own grief, actually. And I think what I thought was sort of aloofness was actually a sadness that he had inside him because he'd lost his mother quite young. And so as we started to open up to each other, we sort of found a place to meet, and that's when I sort of, when you start to just feel that,
the flutter.
You're very interesting.
The crush develops.
The crush, yes. But we sort of danced around each other at work for ages. I was slightly nervous about having an office romance. It wasn't something that I thought I would ever do, but it was really hard to resist him. And very quickly we sort of fell in love and moved in together, and that was that, really.
That was that. Then you moved to Australia?
Yes. So that was one of the very first conversations we had, was how much we both loved Australia. He'd been travelling over here. I had done the same, but I also had family here. So it was a really natural progression for us, I think, to sort of talk about whether we would consider moving over to Australia together. And it was kind of just a big, yes, let's do it.
When you think about him, do you think, he was such a funny guy, he was such a kind guy, a smart guy? When you think about him, what thoughts come to your mind?
I just feel immense gratitude and love, really, when I think about him. And it's taken me a long time to get to that place where it doesn't feel really heavy and really painful. I mean, the love was always there, and I think that's something I've learnt about grief, is grief stays with you, but that means that the love's staying too, which is sort of the hope of it all, really. And so I just feel now, when I reflect on Matt and the man he was, I feel incredibly lucky to have met him and married him and had his kids. And just I feel grateful. And I often, now when I hear a song on the radio that reminds me of him, or something just jumps into my mind, or the kids do something that reminds me of him, which is happening more and more as they grow up, it's almost like I'm casting out a little thank you to him,
What about the yearning and the aching for him? Because I can't imagine how intense in the early days you could still smell him. You just would have wanted to be, I imagine, cuddled and held by him. And that aching.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a huge part of grief, that longing that you live with. It's just permanent. And I mean, I can remember having to line up the pillows in the bed next to me to try and sort of almost fake that he was in bed next to me to try and get to sleep, because I couldn't keep taking sleeping pills because I needed to be, on call for the kids if they were disrupted in the night or needed me. But I just found it really hard, particularly those quiet hours in the evening when you would come back together as a family.
And July, it's cold in Australia as well.
Yeah.
So it's like you want that warm body next to you.
Yeah. Yeah, it was hard. Like, I just felt desperate for him, really. And it took a really long time to get to a place where, first of all, I could accept what had happened, accept the accident. Like, my brain had to piece it all together to really accept that he was not coming back. And that did take a really long time. I think sudden death, sudden loss, it's such a shock that's one of the things you're battling with, is remapping the world to kind of understand that your person's not in it anymore. And so, it took a really long time. And I think yearning, longing is a huge, huge part of grief, no matter who you lose.
That aching. Where did you cry? Because obviously you've got to get up and be a mother and put cereal on the table and pack their lunch boxes, and that's the reality, and it can be a great distraction in some ways, but you also need to let yourself have those moments where you do cry. Where did you cry and break down?
That's a really good question, actually. I'm trying to think now. Like, I did cry in front of the kids. I tried not to ever get to a point where I was out of control or in a place where it would scare them to see my emotion. But I think it was really important that they did see me occasionally responding to Matt's death with honesty. And a lot of that was sadness, because they felt it too. And I think if I'd maintained like this composure, it wouldn't have given them permission.
And it's sadness, but it's also love.
Absolutely.
And they need to see that.
Totally. They need to see that I am grieving their dad and I miss him too. And so I did cry in front of them, but I tried to keep it relatively contained, not sort of... I had moments where I shut myself in our walk-in wardrobe and just fell to my knees and wailed. But I tried not to do that in front of the kids. I think that I can remember one episode where I lost it, and I actually write about it in the memoir. It was an incredible moment because they actually came and comforted me.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
I thought I'd scared them, but the two of them just came and hugged me. And so, in a way, that shows how important it was that the three of us bonded together through the experience. But I think there were also times when I would take myself out, and there was a park where I'd sometimes walk, sometimes run, and there was a spot there, a really private spot down by the harbour, and sort of being close to the water, weirdly, was quite comforting for me, because obviously Matt had drowned in the ocean. The harbour felt safe. It wasn't, a surf beach, but it was still the same body of water kind of flowing in and out. And so sitting by the water and watching the light playing on it, sometimes, it was pretty painful, but I would find it a release to go and just, sob privately.
And also the salt air on your skin, and just that being, nature is beautiful to be in.
It is. It kind of brings you back to life in a funny way. And also the ocean was a place that Matt loved. That's why he surfed. He loved being in the sort of moment, and surfing is so about the moment, the now. You can't be anywhere but present. And so I think in a way it brought me comfort to go to the water, which I knew, although it was the place that stole him from us, it was also a place that he loved. So I think it's natural to sort of feel a connection maybe to him through that place.
Tell me about going back to Tamarama Beach and how that felt.
So I did that quite early on. I went with a friend and I needed to go and try and understand. I think it was the first time that I felt that I was trying to piece together what had actually happened to Matt. And it was sort of like doing my own investigation. And I went down to Tamarama and I sat quite a long way back from the waves on the sand, and I just kind of looked around, and it was incredibly emotional, obviously, but it's such a beautiful place. I mean, it's stunning down there. So there was a small part of me that could still feel some kind of comfort that Matt had died in this really beautiful landscape. I mean, it sounds really weird to say.
But doing what he loved as well.
Yeah, there was a small amount of comfort to be found in that. But it was immensely painful. And then I actually walked up onto the cliffs to overlook where they call it the Twins. It's sort of a rocky outcrop which separates Bronte Beach from Tamarama Beach. You probably know it well. And I went and stood up there to sort of look down and try and understand sort of the rips and the tidal movement and, you know, the sort of freakish accident that had unfolded for Matt. And it was bizarre because I actually found the fisherman who had called 000 as Matt's accident was unfolding. He'd been the one to alert the emergency services. So I was able to talk to him and get his perspective on what had happened. And, you know, it was emotional for him. And I don't think he was expecting to be confronted in that moment by the grieving widow. But actually it was incredibly helpful for me to have somebody share what they had seen. And, you know, I mean, he was deeply upset to tell me, but it was really helpful.
We are going to be back in just a minute with Hannah after this very short break. For people who haven't read your memoir yet, can you explain what happened in the accident?
So there was a coroner's inquest into it a long time afterwards. It was deemed to be sort of in the public interest that they should investigate what happened in case I think there were any learnings for Tamarama Beach and the surf lifesavers. And basically it transpires that it was just a freak accident. Matt was a really cautious man. He wasn't reckless at all. He went out with a friend. They assessed the situation. Everything looked good. They went out on their boards. And then it seems that the wind and tide conditions just changed really quickly. And for some reason, Matt lost his board. The leg rope snapped or came loose. So when you're separated from your board and then you're caught in a rip, it's quite a dangerous situation, particularly if you're near rocks. And Matt just got washed into this sort of rocky headland. And without his board, there was really nothing he could do. And in fact, it was the fisherman who said, you know, he did everything he could possibly do. He let the rip take him, which is what you're supposed to do. Unfortunately, he got washed into the rocks and he was trying to get out. You know, there was really only one choice, which was to try and climb out. But a wave came up behind him and pushed him forward and he hit his head and that was it. And unfortunately, he drowned.
It was a absolute freak accident.
Freak accident.
And this is the thing about nature. It is so powerful.
Yes.
Yeah. Suddenly it changed. The rip changed, the tide changed.
Yeah. And, you know, I think some people wanted someone to blame, but really there was no one to blame. You know, that's kind of like a different story, but it wasn't our story. It was this accident that unfolded and unfortunately that day Matt died, and that's all I can really say about it, really.
What have your children taught you about grief? Because children teach us so much about ourselves, and while you're grappling with your own grief, you're trying to mother and navigate their grief.
Yeah.
It has been 12 years. What are the greatest lessons that your children have taught you?
Well, I think in the early days, they taught me that, you know, being a writer, I can be quite in my head. And they taught me that sometimes there's a time for talking and analysing and, you know, processing the feelings. And sometimes you just have to kind of let go and be silly or, you know, dance in the kitchen or just kind of let it out, you know, run around the courtyard or have ice cream for dinner. You know, like doesn't really matter. When everything goes pear-shaped, like, you've got to give yourself a bit of grace. And so I think that's what they taught me in that moment, that it was okay to sort of feel all the feelings and to try and still laugh and be silly sometimes.
Do you remember the first time you laughed after Matt's death?
It was probably with my sister. I think we had a moment in the funeral home where we were trying to choose. I mean, it was horrific.
It's dark comedy. It's like,
Yeah.
you can only laugh. This is so horrific.
Yes.
I have to just have a moment
Yeah.
to laugh.
We found the whole process of planning Matt's funeral completely surreal. And I can remember we made sort of really inappropriate jokes to each other as little asides in this funeral home. And I'm sure the woman who was trying to guide us through this process thought we were crazy, but I think it was the only way we were going to get through it. So it would have been with my sister. She's always been that kind of light that has been able to make me laugh in inappropriate moments.
And how lovely she was in Melbourne.
Yes.
And obviously you're close. She was
Yeah.
right there by your side.
She kind of saved me. Those first 2 weeks, she didn't really leave my side. I don't really remember being without her in those first 2 weeks. So
Wow, that's incredible.
so lucky. Yeah, so lucky to have a sister like that. Yeah.
Wow, that's incredibly special.
Yeah.
So your children taught you
Yeah.
how to laugh and have moments of laughter.
Yeah, that was the early days. And then I think just watching them grow up, change, set about what their ambitions are and what they want out of their life. They're young adults now and they're starting to look more outwards at university choices and careers. I think I'm just seeing such strength and resilience in them. Great empathy when other people are going through difficult things. I see that they've got really open hearts. They can respond to other people's difficulties in a way that I'm not sure a lot of kids their age would be able to do. So that's, I don't like to talk about silver linings in grief because grief's so hard. But I do think it's changed us in lots of ways. And some of them, maybe aren't so great, but some of them are actually kind of wonderful.
They will no doubt, they already sound like they are, be incredibly resilient, empathetic, loving children.
Yeah, I'm really proud of them. I think bearing in mind what they've carried in their young lives, I'm constantly amazed by them.
And grief gives you such incredible perspective. It makes you realise how fleeting and how precious life is. It makes you evaluate your relationships and have more gratitude towards them. In the last 12 years, how has grief shaped and changed you?
I think it's exactly that, just what you said. I think I live with more intention each day. I try to, it's not easy, it's very easy to slip back into that sort of just following the routines and getting caught up in the day-to-day stresses of everything. But I think it's given me a greater gift in terms of trying to understand that every day that we get to be here is precious. And often what we look back on and mark our lives by isn't the kind of huge career moments, the promotions, the fancy holidays, the weddings.
The house, the car.
No, it's none of that. It's actually, when I look back on my life with Matt, the things I was missing was simple things like brushing our teeth together and smiling at each other in the bathroom mirror, or just going for a walk and sharing a moment, sharing a coffee and having a conversation. And I think that's what it's taught me, is to appreciate those small moments, because really that's what our lives are pinned together by. So every day that we get to have a really steady, ordinary day now, I'm kind of grateful for it.
An ordinary life is a blessing.
Totally.
It really is.
Yeah. And I think I didn't appreciate that. And I didn't understand how ephemeral everything was, how it could be snatched away from you in a moment, like I write in the book, it takes one ocean one day and your life can change. That's what I've learned really, is to just try and be present, try and hold everything with gratitude. Remember that as much as it hurts, something I read in a Julian Barnes book actually was a kind of like a mantra for me as I went through my grief, was it hurts exactly as much as it was worth. So when it feels really heavy and really painful, and it still can do some days, I just remember that I'm honouring Matt. It's the love, and that's why it hurts. The love is still there. And so I kind of cling to that, and that's the way I want to live my life now, is kind of honouring, remembering, but also moving forwards.
And I've read a lot about love, and I mean, ultimately all love ends in heartbreak. You'll either get divorced or the person will die.
Yes.
But you go through this pain because love should be, if it's the right love, extraordinary, and so it's worth the pain at the end.
I think so. I mean, the alternative is that you close yourself down, you put up your walls, you build, you have that shell around you, and I don't think you're really living then. I think you're not open to life's full richness. So yes, it's a mess and it's really hard at times, but I kind of saw I had a choice. I could either get very brittle and stay in this very dark, sad place, or I could let the grief kind of move through me, crack me open. And it's almost like when I had my children, I didn't know if I would have the capacity, to hold them and to love them deeply, deeply. It's frightening becoming a parent, but your heart expands, and so I think that's sort of what's happened in my grief as well. My heart has expanded, and I kind of want it to. I don't want to shut myself down to what might be next.
How did you feel about telling people? So, for example, I'm sure there were times where someone said, "Oh, is your husband coming to this, or will he be at Father's Day?" Not knowing what had happened to you. How did you approach saying, "Oh, well, actually, my husband's passed away, or I'm a widow"? How did that feel?
Well, I kind of learned that I didn't have to just blurt it all out. In the early days, I sort of carried it like this open wound, so I didn't have my guard up. And if someone started talking about Matt, or I just kind of blurted it out. I can remember a really terrible situation, which I still feel really bad about. I think it was only 2 weeks after Matt had died, and I decided that it would be a really good idea. You can see I wasn't in my right mind. I thought it would be a really good idea to take the kids back to their swimming lessons because I didn't want them to be afraid of water, which I think was way too soon, obviously.
But I also think in that situation, you're looking to control things. Like, we're all in times where everything's out of our control. You're like, right, what can I control?
Yes.
Okay, kids not being afraid of water.
Routine.
So routine, right, I'll do that. And it's just a way of coping because everything is out of control.
So I was sort of in this like, okay, we'll just keep following the routine. And I sat on the edge of this swimming pool, and someone that I had worked with came and saw me and said, "Oh, hi, Hannah, how's your, winter holiday been?" And I think he said, "You look really tired." And I just said, "Oh, it's not been so good, actually. Matt died." And I could see his face, he was crestfallen. And I just blurted it out. And I still, to this day, feel incredibly bad that I...
You should not feel bad. I would have done the same. And, I mean, what do you say? It's 2 weeks.
I didn't want to lie, but I didn't know how to navigate that situation.
There's no right answer to that. What you say, "Yeah, great, thanks."
Yes, exactly. And if I pretended, that would have been even more weird had he then gone home and heard about Matt's accident. So, but what I learnt was, if I went and got my hair cut at the hairdressers and they were like, "How you doing?" I didn't have to tell them if I didn't want to. The people that needed to know knew. And if I felt okay in that moment, sometimes I would say, but I also learnt that sometimes I could hold back and I didn't have to kind of just release my baggage into the world. But it was a learning curve because, as I said earlier, there was still this kind of weird shame attached with what had happened to us.
And it also so fragile in those early days. Like, you're still grappling with, so in a way it's like...
You're sort of managing everyone else's feelings as well as your own and trying to work out what's appropriate behaviour from me, but also how to manage this sort of bombshell that you could potentially drop on someone at any moment.
In just a moment, Hannah shares how she continues to live with grief and still found love again. How did you feel about others' opinions on, because suddenly your life is up in the air, the life that you had doesn't exist anymore. I'm sure there would have been a lot of opinions about, okay, you should move back to the UK, you should move here, you should put the kids here.
Yeah.
Were there those opinions, and how did you grapple? Everyone would have been trying to care for you and, I'm sure have good intentions. How did you take a step back and work out exactly what you wanted to do next?
It was really hard because I honestly didn't know what I wanted to do next. I mean, all I wanted to do was go back in time and live the life that I'd been living. I mean, that's the weird thing with grief and time, is that you kind of want to not be in the present, but you don't want to be in the future either, because you know that's scary and unknowable. So you just want to live in the past, and you can't get back there. So trying to work out what we needed and wanted next was incredibly hard. I was given a piece of advice by someone, which was, don't do anything life-changing in the first 2 years. Just kind of try and sit tight, which I think was good advice in retrospect. But at times I felt absolutely locked into this really horrific time frame of like, we've got to get through the first 2 years. And I just, part of me wanted to, just run away and go and live in Thailand and do really inappropriate things and just discover myself again. And another part of me just wanted to kind of go to bed and not ever get out of bed again. And so trying to navigate what we needed as a family was really, really hard. But once we hit that 2-year marker, I had this feeling rising up in me that to live in the same house without Matt, to keep travelling those same streets, I felt like I was sort of almost being haunted by him, and I was still waiting for the sound of his key in the front door in the evenings, still kind of searching for him sometimes when I went out in our neighbourhood.
Because everything around you was a part of
Totally.
him. You'd done it all together.
Yeah, it was our life, and walking through the park to the school was the route that we had walked together so many times. It was like, he was kind of the shadow beside me still. And it wasn't that I wanted to erase that, but I just knew that for my own future, I would have to change something. Yes.
By
it's
every
like
moment.
Another arrow to the heart every time. In the end, I felt that leaving our neighbourhood for a while, I didn't know how long it would be, but I felt that leaving was the right thing for us to do. But that in itself was a heartbreak, because then you're packing up your home, you're shedding belongings, it's more loss really, because you're having to say goodbye to the place that's held you so safely for
Your
such a long
life
time.
with the man that you love.
Yeah. So that was difficult, but there was a sense of relief and kind of release, actually, in terms of kind of stepping forward, making an active decision to do something different. And I didn't know if it was going to work. I'd had no idea if I was making a terrible mistake, but our choices were either to go to Melbourne to be with family there, or to go back to the UK and be with family there. And in the end, I felt that the UK would be just perhaps being closer to my mum and my brother. I think I just needed to step away from Australia just for a little bit, just to kind of breathe.
There is a moment in your memoir, and you're preparing to scatter Matt's ashes, and your son says, "Daddy, be free," which brought me to tears. What did that moment mean to you?
I think I had been searching quite desperately for rituals to pin our grief to. Like, we weren't a religious family. We didn't have religion to kind of have as a framework to guide us through our experience of loss. So it was quite hard at times to know what the right things were to do, like how do you conduct a funeral when you don't have that religious framework? And, in terms of releasing the ashes, I felt like it was obviously a really significant moment, and one that the kids might remember, because we did it almost 2 years after Matt had died. So they were just that little bit older. So I knew that it should have some kind of sense of ceremony, but I also didn't want it to feel like this big kind of overdone moment. It needed to feel natural and
if it's even possible, but some joy in it.
Yes,
which is why it's so lovely what your son said, because it does feel joyful to me.
Yes, I think so too. And I think, Matt was a really simple, authentic kind of man. So in the end, we decided we would go down to the spot by the harbour that we all loved. And we took the ashes down. We were just with a very small group of people. And I kind of bumbled my way through some words which I hadn't really thought about properly. And it all felt a little bit wrong. Felt like we hadn't said quite the right thing. And then my son came out with, "Can I say something? I just want to say, Daddy, be free." And that was as we were releasing the ashes. And I mean, I don't think any of us there had a sort of dry eye. It was so emotional. but it was, of course, the perfect thing to say.
Was your son the 5-year-old?
No, he was. He would have been about 8 then.
8.
I mean, I didn't know what he was going to say when he said, "Can I say something?" I was worried it was going to be, can we go and get some Pokemon cards? It could have been anything.
Which is entirely possible for
Yes,
children.
Totally.
Which is sometimes in grief, like a relief that they just say. Like I remember my beautiful grandma, my nanny, passed away, and I was driving, and my eldest daughter, who was about 4 at the time, said, "Mum, little nanny should have done more yoga." It made me laugh.
Yeah.
And it was only a week or days after she passed, and I was so
But isn't that
distraught.
such a kind of wonderful response in that, kids are processing it all at the same time as us. And I just think what they say, how they act, often it's the most honest reaction. And actually, if they can make you laugh or they can say something that feels really honest, then it's kind of amazing.
And I mean, she was 93, so she was towards the end of her life. But yoga,
Yeah.
she did have a point. It's like, it's not that far off. You are very honest in your memoir about loneliness and sex and dating and desire after loss. What was that experience like? Because I can't even imagine thinking about dating. Like, there's just so many layers there.
Yeah, it really struck me. I was surprised to feel this. I mean, it was quite a long time after Matt had died. I felt this feeling rising up in me that I started to sort of think, well, I didn't die, and I'm still a relatively young woman. And I was sort of starting to crave physical contact with people, and it was very odd. And I felt really guilty and ashamed about it. And I was seeing this incredible counsellor at the time, and I went to see her and I said, I just don't understand where all this is coming from. And she was so good because she allowed me to say everything without any judgment coming back from her. So it felt like a really safe space. And she just said, but who wouldn't want to feel something other than what you're feeling?
But it's human.
It's human.
We're wired for connection and for love.
Exactly. And so she kind of made it feel like what I was feeling wasn't so horrendously wrong. And it took me a while, but it was a whole brave new world. When Matt and I got together, there were no dating apps. So suddenly there's this whole new world to navigate. And I do write in the memoir a couple of experiences I had. And they taught me basically that what I was looking for at that point wasn't intimacy with just anyone. I was really craving intimacy with Matt, and I was just missing him saying my name, hearing my name in his voice, hearing Han, the way he said it, was what I was longing for more than anything. But I think it's a natural response. I've kind of read more about it since then. And I think with death comes this sort of urge to reach for life. And I guess there's no greater urge for life than, physical contact with another person. But, it wasn't quite what I needed at that time.
What can you share with our listeners and viewers about the very first date? Because I can't imagine getting dressed for your very first date, just going, what?
Yeah.
It must have been incredibly
surreal. I kind of felt a bit sick, to be honest, and sort of excited. It was nice to feel that there might be somebody out there that would find me attractive, that wanted to meet me for a drink. And actually, the person I met was incredibly kind and very sort of gentle with me. Once I'd explained my story, we had a really nice evening, and it was just one evening of conversation and drinks and a kiss at the end. But it was kind of like a gentle introduction to the fact that there could be another me out there in time. And but I then went back and lay in my bed at home and felt all at sea, really. It was just like, what is this life I'm living? I don't recognise it.
And I don't want this life. I want Matt back. I want to go on a date with Matt.
Totally. Yeah, I just want to carry on the conversation that we'd had for 13 years. And yet, you can't. It's abruptly ended.
12 years since Matt has passed. How do you feel about dating and love, and how do you feel about that now?
Well, I'm repartnered now.
Yes.
So this was an interesting thing to kind of understand what to put in the final chapters of my memoir because I write fiction, and
Yes.
fiction has, very neat beginnings, middles, and endings.
Which you can control as well.
Totally.
Because it's like, it's fiction.
Yeah. Whereas when you're writing a memoir, it's your life. And this is obviously a section of my life. But where do you choose the end point? Where is the ending? And I didn't really know. But I wanted the book to show how I had changed through my grief. And I did meet someone about 5 or 6 years after Matt had died. And I went on a date, and there was this instant, very real connection. And we started dating, and we're still together now. We're married.
Wow.
We've got 5 kids between us. So we have this kind of big, chaotic family life.
The blend.
A blend. It's definitely a blend. But we're so lucky. The kids all get on really well. And I've met this amazing guy who can see all these sort of broken, messy parts of me. He knows all about Matt. He kind of understands that the grief is with me, as is the love, but that, my heart is big enough to hold all of it now. And so we just step forward into this new life together, and I think we have our eyes wide open, and it's really a really wonderful thing.
And it's a big thing for a man. So my father, my stepmother, her husband and father of her 3 daughters died when her youngest was 1.5.
Oh, wow.
I can't imagine. I think the others were 3 and 4,
Yeah.
3 very young children,
Yeah.
and he died of cancer. And I think a couple of years after he had passed away, she met my dad. And it is a big thing to step into those shoes and be that figure for those
Yeah.
children. And I just think it is like, what an incredible man
Yes.
to do that, because they call him Rob, but he's essentially, he is a father figure
Yeah.
to them. He's not their father, but he's a father figure. And he's played such a huge role in their life. And so I think, the man that you have married, your husband, it's an incredible role that he'll play or has played. In
That's
those
really
children's.
beautiful what you've just shared. And I see the same in our family. Like, I think it takes a really special person to be able to see the grief, see the sadness, not try and become a replacement dad, but just to be there for us. And he's navigating it incredibly well. It's not easy,
No.
None of it's easy. But yeah, he's got a really generous heart. And I think we're just incredibly lucky that we have met each other at this point in our lives.
So how do you feel about grief and love? Like 12 years in, you've lost, you've loved again. How would you describe grief and your journey with it?
I see it as a weight, that you learn to carry. And it's changed me so much. Matt's life changed me, but his death has also changed me. And I sort of feel it's an honour, really, to remember him and carry his memory forward and raise his kids and be their mum. And so I see life as this strange merging of the sad, the bitter and the sweet, really. And that's for all of us. We're all carrying hard things, doing really difficult things, living lives that, sometimes are on course and sometimes go way off course. And I think the more that we can talk about our experiences, share them, and understand that these are what kind of bind us together as human beings. Love and loss is probably the fundamental things as human beings that will connect us. And so that's why I wrote the book, and that's the way I try and live my life now, is understanding that it's all just this big, messy combination of everything, and it's kind of to be celebrated.
Would you say there's no fast track with grief, in the sense that it's, you met someone 6 years after Matt passed away? That is a long time to navigate, longing to be held in bed and aching for Matt and trying to parent these 2 children who are navigating grief. Do you think that you just have to go through it? You have to go through the tears and...
Yeah, I think it's going to be different for everybody. So I would hate to speak for someone else and their grief experience, but I can speak to mine, and I think it takes as long as it takes. My trajectory through grief, with grief, still carrying grief, will be probably different to somebody else's. But from my experience, you do have to allow it in. You have to accept it. The more you resist it, I found the harder it was for me to bear it. So actually accepting it, saying, oh, hi grief, you're here again today, here we go again. It sort of helped to just allow it to be. And I guess that would be my advice to someone who is in the early stages is, yes, it's incredibly hard, and no, you didn't choose this. But if you turn to face it and understand that it's your love and the way you're honouring the person that you miss, that it does soften in time. It does get a little easier.
And acceptance as well, because I imagine that takes time to accept.
Yeah.
Okay, he's gone.
Yeah.
I accept he's gone.
I didn't even really know what they meant by acceptance for a really long time. I mean, I kind of question it in my book. There's a morning when I wake up and I didn't have to tell myself that morning that Matt had died. It was just sort of in my body, like it was suddenly part of my DNA that, okay, he's not next to me now when I wake up in the morning. So at that point I was like, is this acceptance? Or then I wondered if it was when I finally understood the full details of the accident and the inquest closed. And it was like, okay, is this acceptance? And actually, I think acceptance, I don't know, I'll probably change my mind again tomorrow, but maybe it's just understanding that the grief isn't really going anywhere, but I've learnt to carry it and it's changed me, and I can kind of carry it differently now and see it almost as an honour to have it. Yeah.
Hannah, last question. The name of this podcast is You're Going to Want to Hear This. So what is one message that you want people to take away from your memoir?
I think the ultimate message would be that, life is precious, and focus on what's important to you, understanding that everything is fragile, and when something terrible happens, it can be incredibly hard, but there will be people that will step up to accompany you and be with you. And at the end of the day, what you're most afraid of is losing the love. And actually what I've learnt is that the love does stay.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much, Hannah.
Oh, thank you, Georgie. It's so nice to talk to you. Thank you.
That was such an incredibly moving story. I have tears in my eyes, and I'm sure you do as well. And I am so grateful for Hannah for sharing it with us. I also hope that this chat made anyone who's experienced grief feel a little less alone. Please go and read Hannah's memoir. It's called An Ocean and a Day, and it's out now. For more stories of style and substance with Marie Claire, make sure to follow You're Gonna Want to Hear This on your favourite podcast app. And if you'd prefer to watch in high def, you can subscribe to Marie Claire's YouTube channel, and that way you will never miss an episode. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next week.